Hi everyone, my name is Lara Milligan. I am the Natural Resources Agent here at Brooker Creek Preserve. That's where my office is located, but I work for UF IFAS Extension in Pinellas County. So we are an extension of the University of Florida, and today we're going to be learning all about water, and specifically we're going to explore the water story here at Brooker Creek Preserve. So this map here highlights both Pinellas County to the left and Hillsborough County to the right, and we are in this massive green space of Brooker Creek Preserve, which is the largest remaining natural area in Pinellas County. And you can see it says you are here, so we're in the very northern part of the preserve, and so we are going to explore just a small part of the Brooker Creek watershed. So if you see Brooker Creek watershed's written in white here, so this white outline here shows the massive area. So all this area encompasses land where water that lands in this area can flow and contribute to Brooker Creek, which ultimately flows into Lake Tarpon. And on the broader scale, all of that water plus some over here makes up the Lake Tarpon watershed. So any water that even falls on this side of Lake Tarpon can flow into the lake, which eventually, when water levels are really high, and we'll talk about this later, can flow into Upper Tampa Bay. All right, so we are here at our first stop on our water story, and when we are exploring the water story, we want to ask a couple questions. One is, where did this water come from? What happens to the water? And then where does this water go? So our first stop here is a little pond just outside the Education Center, and upon observing, you might look around and think, I don't know, where does this water come from? And the answer is rain. So this is actually a lined pond. It's a man-made pond that was built as part of the process for creating the Education Center here. And if you can see behind me, there's some windows so visitors can look over this pond as they come here to learn all about the preserve. And so when we're thinking again, so the water comes from rain. What happens to this water? So unfortunately, this isn't a natural system, so it's kind of stuck in this lined man-made pond. So the way that water would normally function in the actual creek is slightly different here. And then where does this water go? Well, it's here again. It doesn't really go anywhere other than, of course, there's evaporation. And we actually have a pump set up, so this retains water year-round, which during our dry season actually attracts a ton of different animal and wildlife species. So we've had everything from otters, gators, snakes, fish, frogs, you name it. We've pretty much seen it here in this pond. And another thing you might notice is there's a lot of leaf litter in the bottom of this man-made pond. And that's because, again, it's lined, and so the process for decomposition is slightly altered, and because there's so much leaf litter, the process for decomposition for the leaves that are way beneath here, there's not enough oxygen to really allow decomposition to happen very quickly. And so our leaf litter is accumulating quite a bit, which wouldn't necessarily happen in a natural system. So we kind of have to clear out the leaves here and there, and water levels will fluctuate throughout the year. But so that's the water story here with this pond. Okay, so we are at stop number 2 now, and this is Brooker Creek. So this is what the preserve is named after. And again, we're going to ask ourselves, where does this water come from? So in the case of Brooker Creek, it actually originates in Hillsborough County, and there's a preserve there called Brooker Creek Headwaters Nature Preserve. So if you wanted to go check out where Brooker Creek starts, you can head there. Unfortunately, there won't be a whole lot to see there because this is also rain-fed. So this is a rain-fed creek. There's no spring at the headwaters or anything that kind of starts the flow of the creek. And so this water will fluctuate quite significantly throughout the year, depending on whether we're in the rainy season or the dry season. So the rainy season in Florida occurs from May to October, and so water levels tend to be high then, and it can actually dry up to where this isn't even a continuous flowing creek. It's kind of just puddles where water is deeper, and so again, it changes throughout the year. Okay, and so now we just turned around and we are now looking at where the water goes for Brooker Creek. So, does anyone know where the water goes? It flows into Lake Tarpon. And so, while you can't really see the flow right now, it is slowly flowing in that direction, emptying into Lake Tarpon. And then if you're familiar with Lake Tarpon, there's a lot of development around the lake. And so there is actually a control structure at the very southern part of the lake that wasn't originally there. But as development happened and when water levels got high, people were not very happy. And water levels got really low, people weren't happy because they didn't have their waterfront property anymore. And so it's now regulated. When water levels get really high, they can empty out the water through that control structure, which flows ultimately into Upper Tampa Bay. And another thing you might note, and we're very fortunate we can see it right now because we've had a lot of rain, is the color of the water. So a lot of people might think Brooker Creek is really gross, it's polluted, it's disgusting, look at it. But this is something referred to as black water, and I always use the analogy of like a cup of tea. So like I said, this is rain fed, rain is clear, and so the rain falls in the water, it's clear, but there's all this vegetation around, dropping leaves all throughout the year. Those leaves contain something called tannins, and when those leaves get into the water, the tannins leach from the leaves into the water, staining it, just like a cup of tea. So think about when you put a tea bag in a clear cup of water, it will turn a similar color to what we see here at Brooker Creek. So it doesn't mean anything's wrong with the water, it's just part of the natural process. All right, so the next thing that we are going to take note of here is if we look down into the creek here, you might have even noticed it in the previous stop, but there's all this green stuff, and believe it or not, there is water underneath. This is called salvinia. The scientific name is Salvinia minima, and this is an invasive floating water fern. It's actually from South America, and it's an unfortunate thing that we have here at Brooker Creek, and the downside and impact of this is, as you can see, there's no way that sunlight can really get through the water here because it's completely covered with this salvinia, and without sunlight, right, plants need sunlight to grow, and so that reduces the amount of oxygen that's available to the species that live in the water beneath, because the plants aren't able to do their photosynthesis and give us the oxygen that all the, not only other plants in the water, but animals need to survive. So it's an unfortunate thing we have, but we do want to point it out, and something that you can easily observe here at Brooker Creek Preserve. All right, so another part of the watershed story, or your water story, is to think about how you fit into your water story. And so I'm here presenting to you today standing on a boardwalk made by us. And this particular boardwalk enables us to walk through a wetland system, which we wouldn't normally be able to do without, having full-on waders or boots and tromping through the water. And so I encourage you guys, as you walk around, whether it's your neighborhood or maybe your place of work or even inside a building, and think about what's the water story here, where does this water come from, what happens to it, where does it go, and then how do you fit into the water story? How are you impacting, whether it's water quantity, quality, supply, you name it, we have an impact on water in some way, shape, or form. At this stop here, we're going to be looking at something called an ecotone, which is basically where two different ecosystems come together. And so, one thing we want to note here is if you look at the vegetation above ground, even though we're talking about water, if you look to my right and your left, you'll see there's a lot of saw palmetto, there's some pine trees, and then as we transition, the pine trees disappear, and you'll start to see ferns in the understory. We start to pick up different species like tupelo and oaks, some cypress trees as well. And what you might not be able to see is there is a very slight change in elevation. So again, to my right and your left, it's kind of more uphill. There's a slow decline downhill. And the really neat thing about Florida is it only takes very, very small changes in elevation to dramatically change what we see above ground. And that all has to do with water. So now we're at our last stop of our water story here at Brooker Creek Preserve. And one thing you can note is at the very base, so that's a cypress tree, you can see there's kind of a clear line. It's a little bit darker below and it's lighter up top. So that's actually what we call the water line. The line at the very top shows how high the water level can get or has been historically. And you can see that it's way down from where that line is. But that tells you a lot about the water that's here. And another thing to note is the base of the tree. So you can see that it kind of gets wider and wider and wider at the base. And we call this buttressing. And a lot of wetland tree species have this adaptation, and that is designed to aid them in stabilization because they're in wet soils. So I like to always demonstrate this using a volunteer. I'm going to volunteer myself today, and my camera woman, Julia, is going to assist me. So if I was, say, we'll just say a pine tree, and so they are very, very straight, they don't have the buttress base, and say a big hurricane, we're in hurricane season right now, comes by and pushes me over. She's going to push me over, my feet are together. Whoa! It's very easy to fall over. But if I'm a cypress tree or a tupelo tree, I'm smart and I have a very wide, sturdy base. So when hurricane comes and I'm in the wet soils, you're not stopping me. So it's just another adaptation that these wetland tree species have. And there's also something you might be familiar with. Both actually tupelo trees and cypress trees have something called knees. And while there's debate about their purpose, there's a few possible options that are going on in the scientific community. One is that they're used for gas exchange because this is let's just say there's not a lot of oxygen available in this type of environment. It can also be used for extra stabilization. And then another theory is used for competition. They'll put up these knees to keep other trees from growing nearby.